there's a video from Silly Conversations, who I've been watching a lot, and if you have not seen Silly Conversations, I would highly recommend you do so. They are a fantastic content creator, and they actually do a lot of stuff in the AI safety world, trying to basically go, hey, if we are forced to have this technology in general, and we cannot stop ourselves from having it, then we should at least make sure that this shit is safe for the environment, and it does not end up having as many fucking dead bodies associated with it as have already piled up in association with it. Honestly, I think his stuff is fantastic. He has a very, very realistic view of how things will function, and he's actually done work in the field as well before starting his channel, so to hear him tell it, he actually has experience with this shit from the inside, which means that a lot of his perspectives are actually going to be based a little more in reality than some of the stuff that we tend to get from people who give knee-jerk reactions to shit on either side of this. Whether you get the people who go, the technology is evil, despite the fact that that's not how tools work, or you get the people who are on the other side of it going, it's the future, it's inevitable, despite the fact that that's not how human beings work. Nothing's actually inevitable. Turns out if we, stop things, they stop, which is fucking fantastic, and people don't seem to realize that. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and watch his video about voting age, which I have not seen yet. I started it for a second and then realized that it was something that I actually would like to see all the way through. So we're going to go ahead and do that. But first, fan art. This is from Jet, and they said random crack entry because I had the energy to draw for once. And that is, as of right now, the most recent submissions into the costume contest for the Suris VTuber model. So you know what? If that is our last submission, the last submission being a fucking Pop-Tart cat that is making me suddenly think of the song, and it's now stuck in my head, and it's not going anywhere, and nope, absolutely not. But thank you very much, Jet. I appreciate it. And now that that song is entirely stuck in my head, let's go ahead and say, if you want to submit any fan art, then I will show it on the channel. If you submit it into the costume contest area, then it will be submitted into the costume contest. Cut off for that is basically going to be once the new model debuts is when the cutoff for the contest will be. Any submission that is brought in after that will not be considered. But as of right now, the model is not done yet. A lot of rigging is done. All the artwork assets are done, but it is not finished yet. So let's go ahead and take a look at things over on Silly Conversations' channel. But first, Dryamoxy says, unfortunately, one of my teachers who taught environmental science said to my entire class, AI was the future when I brought it up on the last day of school as well. So let's get a couple things out of the way. One, yes, AI is the future. Not large language models, though, like actual AGI. That's a thing that is the future, in the sense that it's what we are trying to eventually create, even though the tools we are trying to use to create it are not able to create it at the moment, but it is a thing that eventually will happen at some point, because everybody who has this just waxed lyrical perspective on how great it's going to be to have sentient robots, like with every science fiction thing ever, we're eventually going to build it. But large language models scraping the internet and stealing everybody's resources and being and people saying that we are going to use those to take people's jobs away, that's not the future, because we have every ability to, deny that shit. Dry says, yeah, I was talking about LLMs and the data centers' effects on the environment. Yeah, so turns out data centers are not the end-all be-all in terms of environment fuckery. We can actually build them with green energy as the primary thing. The problem is that fucking billionaires like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk don't give a flying shit about keeping our planet safe. They give a shit about profit and expansion at any rate. So the idea of expanding things slowly, methodically, and in a way that doesn't eat up people's jobs, eat up resources, and eat up everybody's fucking power, and turn off power for fucking random people out in the country, they don't give a shit about that. Billionaires don't give a shit about you. They've never given a shit about you. They hate you, actually. Like, you know what's cool? The same technology that makes AI data centers what they are is fairly identical to every other machine learning technology we have ever built. It's fairly identical to every server-based technology that we've ever built. And we've been able to build a lot of that without fucking the environment. And yet somehow, when Peter Thiel and Elon Musk get a hold of it, suddenly the entire Earth is up for rapage. And I just... Man... You know... I'm not saying Elon Musk looks a whole lot like a United Healthcare CEO, but every now and again, I kind of feel like he is. But anyway, that is not the conversation for right now. The conversation for right now is this one from Silly Conversations. We may actually delve into more of his AI stuff, but right now that is kind of the thing that is just on my mind more than anything, how a rapidly advancing technology actively makes me angry because of how it's being utilized by the people who do not give a shit if it ends up inadvertently killing grandma. So, yeah, I'm a little miffed, but not the subject of the video right now. So, Silly Conversations, take it away while I try to get resources in Diablo.
Children should have the right to vote. And I don't just mean 16 and 17-year-olds. I mean that a toddler should be able to toddle into a voting center in a national election, cast a real ballot, and have that vote counted just the same as any other. I really believe this, and by the end of this video, I think you will too. Greetings, children and adult oppressors.
So before we continue, I am on the fence about that. And I'm on the fence about it because while I do believe that we should lower the voting age, I believe we should lower it to the age where people work. Because once you are earning an income and once your hard-earned money from yourself is actually being taxed, your taxation should come with an equal amount of representation. And if it does not come with an equal amount of representation, then we've literally done wars about that. But that's just me. Maybe there's a perspective here that I'm not considering. Maybe there's a part of this that I am not thinking about. I generally have thought that most of the opinions that Silly Conversations has are fairly well thought out. So if this is the case again, then I will consider myself incorrect and with an opinion that's changed. Sakura says, I'd be more of think about it. If someone's old enough to be tried as an adult, maybe the voting age should be around there. That's, yeah, like I said, I'm of the opinion that if you start getting adult responsibilities, you should also get adult rights. And those adult rights should include drinking. They should include recreational drugs, if that's what you are wanting. And it should include voting. Now, at the same time, I mostly have that opinion because we've sent people off in the military and then told them before they, became members of the military, hey, you're old enough to die for the country, but you're not old enough to drink. So that's kind of where my opinion comes from there, and I recognize that the counter to that is easily and very simply alcohol and drugs and shit like that has a far more permanent effect on how the mind operates when it is in formation, so it's not really safe to actually have that, so it's not really an opinion that I'm willing to try to defend much, because I'm 100% in the wrong there when you start looking at what science says. But the voting age is a little bit different. Voting age, an argument can be made that is just teaching kids earlier on to do their civic duty. But let's see here.
I'm your host, Silly Conversations. In most countries, you need to be 18 years old to vote in national elections, and there are no countries where the voting age is lower than 16. Since this is such a universally accepted rule, we should start by discussing some of the obvious reasons for why children should not be given the right to vote. Number one, children aren't smart enough to understand political policy and decide which politicians to support.
All right, so I agree with the logic of that, but I will offer a counter there. You've also described most Republicans. So, realistically, I don't know if that's a good argument.
This is related to number two. Children don't have the emotional maturity for voting, and they'll be easily swayed by propaganda. Number three, voting rights for children would cause division within family units. And
that already can happen. So what you do is you instill very early on into kids the idea that whomst they vote for when they go into the voting booth is something that is private and for them, and not something that their parent should have any sway or control over at all. That would be my take on that. Maybe I'm not correct there. Maybe there's a better way to do that than how I'm thinking. But I think that it is better to teach people early on that there is a perfectly reasonable way to engage in politics and also not talk to people who are caustic about it. Personally.
Besides, their family members with voting rights can already represent their interests. And number 4...
No, the counter-argument to that is abusive parents, actually. Because abusive parents will likely not actually have their opinions 100% in line with what is good for the kids at all. Because they're abusive parents. It's like, by definition, they're just kind of assholes. That's it. Maybe I'm off base on that one as well, but like I feel like a lot of arguments in that realm just kind of die to the base concept of parent who is not actually a good person or actually has the kid's interest in heart, and since we can't control for that, we also should not assume it. Maybe that's not correct. Maybe that's not the right way to go about that. But that is my opinion.
Children don't actually want to be able to vote, and this isn't a real issue.
Yeah, but problem is that there are many adults who also don't want to vote, and I believe that it should be mandatory for them to vote. I don't care whether somebody wants to participate in their civic duty. I think it should be something that is required. Period. And this is coming from somebody who has actively forgot sometimes to go and vote. I still maintain that position.
Oh, hang on. Sorry, I got my notes mixed up. Those were all actual, real reasons given to justify denying women the right to vote.
That's a good one. I like that. That was a good bait and switch. Said wait until he's done. He's giving out a list of arguments he's going to blast counter.
That's right. You've been tricked into agreeing with sexism. But children actually aren't as smart or mature as adults. So, that's obviously not true for all children and all adults, but even if it is true on average, we still run into a pretty serious threshold problem. If a pair of identical twins are born 10 minutes either side of midnight on the annual voter registration deadline, then there will be an election where one twin gets to vote and the other doesn't. For the younger twin, that means years of working, paying taxes and obeying the law as an adult with no democratic representation.
So I do agree with that. And I guess that's why he has the opinion that it should be a thing that doesn't have a timer on it at all. Like that would make sense to me. Because there is no age where that is not just an arbitrary limiting factor.
Despite being the same biological age as their older sibling who got to vote. Okay, but that's a pretty weird edge case. Not really. In a large democracy like the US, hundreds of thousands of 17-year-olds will miss any given voter registration deadline by only a few days or weeks. Besides, intelligence in the population is thought to lie on an approximately normal distribution. That's a bell curve that looks like this. Most people are in the middle, pretty average. Some are smart, and some are not so smart. Even if humans experienced a sudden massive spike in brain power on the day they turn 18, which of course doesn't actually happen, in big countries there would still be millions of 16 and 17-year-olds who are smarter than the average adult. So why don't we just move the voting age to 16? That's not the point. No matter where you put the voting age, there are still going to be millions of people who can't vote, despite being smarter and more mature than millions of people who can. If your plan is to prevent dumb and immature people from voting, then an age cutoff incorrectly deprives millions of people of their right to vote.
It also, like, just as an example, if you've got somebody who's, say, a child prodigy, and I'm not saying this because they deserve voting rights more than others, but like, realistically, somebody who's a child prodigy probably has much more ability to like saliently figure out who they want to vote for than most people who consider themselves apolitical. right? So, like, as an example, here in Georgia, there's a kid named Noah that even like Biden recognized as stupidly smart. And this kid has actively done work with one of the politicians that I have done work for, videography work. I don't think that saying that he's not allowed to vote is a good idea. I think that's stupid. I think that the kid's smart enough to vote, because even the fucking president of the United States, the one that was actually cogent enough to make decisions, not the one that, you know, sucks it up to dictators, basically pointed out like, hey, no, this person's worthy of being in the news.
Which is fundamentally wrong and undemocratic. Also, what do you even mean by maturity? The state, fact, or period of being mature. Oh gee, thanks Google. Cambridge Dictionary, what do you got? The quality of behaving mentally and emotionally like an adult. Okay, so the logic would be that children can't vote because they're not mature, and being children makes them not mature by definition. Cool. This argument that Group X don't have the right emotions to vote properly was...
That's also the one that you could use for women and black people, I'm pretty sure.
Super effective when applied against women, because it's so vaguely defined that it's impossible to disprove. Of course, in practice, one of the main reasons that many men didn't support giving women the right to vote was that it just seemed silly. Like, women? Voting? Women? There wasn't any real logic behind the opposition, so much as historical inertia. Similarly, the main reason that you were probably against giving children the right to vote until 5 minutes ago is just that you've never really thought about it before. And
no, I have thought about it before. I have. I think that it is reasonable to have a measure of civic responsibility that people are eased into, personally. That's just my personal take. I think that it is A-okay. I'm also very, very scared. Like, I'm nightmarishly scared of the world where politicians are trying to court children for their elections. I do not want to try to fathom what that world looks like, because I cannot think of a non-abusive version of that world.
And on an emotional, gut instinct, non-rational level, that makes it seem silly. Just like women's rights seemed silly for men in the early 1900s. The core assumption of having an age or gender requirement for voting rights is that some people aren't smart or mature enough to vote correctly. But voting isn't something you can do correctly. Voting is how you exercise your basic right to be represented in government. If I vote for Logan Paul, and he immediately fills the municipal water supply with prime energy drink and loses the annual budget betting on a meme coin, he's still my representative. My vote for him does not become less legitimate because he made what other people consider to be bad decisions. If you fundamentally believe...
I mean, agreed, but at least for my point, it's less to do with the kids voting improperly and more to do with the predatory world of politics being what it is and aiming that world at children primarily. Now, this is not to say that we don't already live in a version of that world, right? This is the reason why we have like the Kid's Guide to Donald Trump that exists entirely because we already live in a world where those abuses towards children, their development and their minds is already happening. So maybe I'm off base there, but I feel like that's not an argument for giving even more credence to people who want to operate that way.
In democracy, then denying citizens the right to vote is bad. That's Democracy 101. Denying them the right to vote because they're part of a group that you suspect, on average, have traits that will make them more likely to vote wrong is ridiculous and unjustifiable. Also, not that it really matters, but for adults whose jobs don't require a lot of thinking, like YouTubers, school is often the most intellectually demanding period of our lives. Mathematics, science, history, languages. School is an intense daily brain workout, and when you graduate, that knowledge starts to fade if you're not using it regularly. A big chunk of the population are probably the smartest they'll ever be while in school as teenagers.
I actually can agree with that. Okay, so there is one thing that is frustrating that I think all of us have dealt with at some point, and that is the idea that an adult is smarter than a kid by nature of them being an adult, which is kind of the counter to that is to simply show that there are adults that are stupid, and that basically counterbalances that entire claim in one go. Sakura says the main difference is experience. Right. So this is actually something that I got in an argument with my dad about years ago. And my argument against him when he tried to pull the whole, I know more than you, I'm smarter than you, blah, 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 blah. Not in those exact words, but the general vibe. My argument against him then, and the argument that I would use right now, is age is a bucket. And in that bucket, you put experience. The older you get, the more experience your bucket can hold. However, there is such a thing as an empty bucket. There are plenty of people who go through life not actually adding anything to that bucket of experiences at all. The bucket's there. They could populate it with stuff, and they don't for one reason or another. Or they can't for one reason or another. Experience is your capacity, your age is your capacity to have had experience. And experience, conversely, is the actual thing that you have accumulated in that time, or haven't accumulated in that time. So I can agree with that to a degree, because like I said, I've actually had this argument with my own father years ago, specifically because I think when I was a kid, I wanted to be, respected more for my opinions that mattered to me. And now as an adult, I remember being a dumb kid and not having the actual experience to back up those claims. But it doesn't matter if I have the experience to back up those claims. What matters is that I had the ability to. And anybody has the ability to have that experience, no matter what age they are. Just the older they are, the more likely it is they could have had it. Astral Storm says, mostly can or won't. How many people have actually interacted directly with politics, for example, and voting isn't it? Yeah. Voting is not the same thing as participating in politics in general. I've said it on the channel multiple times. That is the bare minimum of civic duty. Like, the bare minimum is voting. Voting is not participation in politics as much as it is just kind of bare minimum shit.
Even if it were justifiable to deny less intelligent or less mature people the right to vote because they'll do it wrong, no one is suggesting we apply that logic to adults. Actually, I would support voter competence testing for adults if the exam could be designed fairly.
Yeah, no, I am not in favor of voter competency tests because, as an example, right? As an example, let's say that the voter competency test prevents somebody who is severely autistic from passing the test. But at the same time, somebody who's severely autistic is also, especially if it comes with like a measure of disability, that person is at extreme risk of being abused by any governmental system, because their access to care, their access to anything that improves their well-being in life, like all of that is going to be dependent on some politician being kind enough to advocate correctly on their behalf, which they might not. So it makes sense that because they are directly affected by those policies, and those policies might even affect them more than the average person, irrespective of whether or not they can pass a competency test, they are the type of person who 100% should be allowed to vote irrespective of that. Astro says there's one thing plenty of people improve with experience, and that is emotional stability and maturity. We could teach that, but we don't. True. Sakura says it wouldn't be just need to be designed fairly, it would have to be proctored fairly.
Maybe by a nonpartisan committee who... Okay, cool.
There's no such thing as a nonpartisan committee. No. There is no such thing as an unbiased person. There is no such thing as a nonpartisan committee. There is no such thing as objective reality that is completely hinged on your perspective. Once your perspective is brought into the conversation, then it is always skewed by your biases. It is not going to be objective anymore, and that's just how things are. Soccer says there are ways to reduce bias. Right. You can reduce it, but you cannot eliminate it. And this is the kind of thing, if we were to means test voting, I would like it to be eliminated. but I know it's not. Not to mention, even in that perfectly neutral world, there are ways in which, like I described earlier, somebody who would be disallowed from voting based on one of those tests is the exact kind of person who needs to be allowed to vote.
Well, so from now on, only geniuses get to vote. What? Yeah, I mean,
that's kind of where you get the Socrates, or was it Socrates or Plato, that wanted to have the, like, quote, democracy, but it was a democracy where the only people who had say were philosophers. I don't remember which one it was, but it was one of those ideas that, like, it sounds super neat on paper until you realize that oftentimes it's going to be the philosophers who determine which philosophers are more adept there at having the ability to make those decisions. And that's not a world you want. Like, the minute that you're just like, aha, my class of people is smarter, and therefore only people from my class of people should be allowed to vote, but also I get to determine who is in my class of people. By the way, I've just described how we've figured out who is Caucasian enough to be considered white in the United States.
You wouldn't want average people voting. They only make average decisions. People love intelligence-based voting rights until it turns out that they're not smart enough to vote. Well, too bad. I believe that voting is an intrinsic human right from which the state derives its legitimacy. But you disagree. So from now on, only the smartest 1% of geniuses get to vote. And hey, why not replace those people with AI the second it starts beating them on the voter smarty pants test? All hail government.io. Democracy schmocracy. Who needs the consent of the governed when you can optimize bureaucratic decision making, am I right? So what? You just let everyone vote? Yes.
Yeah.
Every citizen who is capable of expressing a clear preference between candidates should have the right to vote. But how would child voting actually work in practice? It's not like they can drive to a polling center. Okay, so number one, fundamental rights don't need to be convenient.
Also, that's an argument against kids going to school. It's not like the kid can drive themselves to school, so how would it actually work on paper? Well, on paper, we have buses. On paper, we have people who drive them. Also, you've just described every person ever who has a disability, who is unable to leave the house due to that disability. Like, congratulations, you've just said fucking Iron Mouse is not allowed to vote. That's what that one is. I know that's not you saying it. That's the hypothetical dumbass saying that. Also, mail-in voting is a way we solve that as well. Like, mail-in voting is a thing that allows people who are disabled, who are not able to get up and to go do the advocacy for themselves, for them to still be able to advocate for themselves.
To justify their existence. And number two, have them vote in schools. Let political parties come in to give a little speech and distribute pamphlets in civics class during the election campaign. And make sure to randomize the candidates.
So, fun fact, actually, I grew up in a magnet school system. I went to Brown Barge Academy, and Brown Barge used what was called streams instead of strict classes. The way a stream worked is you picked a focus for a trimester instead of a semester. And when you picked that focus, anything you did was based on that focus. Did you want your focus to be art? Then you didn't have a history class, you had history of art. You learned about Van Gogh and Renoir. That's what you did. For me, it was Mark Rothko, who I studied for my, not thesis, but like thing you had to do to show that you learned what you needed in the class. That's what I did. If you wanted to do flight, then congratulations, you're learning about Amelia Earhart. You're learning about, instead of a strict math class, which we still had to have a math class because that was part of the like No Child Left Behind shit for us. But instead of a strict math class, the idea was that you would have a mathematics of aeronautics engineering class instead, where you would construct planes out of balsa wood, and you'd be graded on how well they flew, and you'd have to be able to write an essay on why it flew that well. And oh, by the way, there's your English and writing class. So I took, during the Kerry versus Bush election in 6th grade, I took the elections course. Every 4 years, Brown Barge had an elections course where you would learn how the government works, why it operates the way it does, history of the government, and you had to learn how to debate. One of the biggest things you took out of it was having to learn how to debate two sides of an issue. Sean says, did you also get your chemistry class learning how to make fossil fuels? No. But it was middle school. We didn't have a fucking chemistry class. So I had to learn political debate in 6th grade. And I think that I came out better for it. Like, the two things that structured how I think and how I do conflict were 6th grade learning political debate and 9th grade learning how to write flowcharts for programming. Learning how an algorithm works was very, very important for me to learn how to actually, think about thinking. It also helped a lot when I was doing that, because you had to learn that machines can't make assumptions about things. At least at the time, they couldn't. There's a little bit of that now with LLMs, but even then, it's kind of skinwalking it. But because you have to assume that machines don't have like base knowledge of stuff, then it also taught me how to teach things better, because I couldn't make assumptions about the things somebody knows. Because I've watched friends of mine when they like have something that they really like a game or something, and they're describing it, and they use jargon and terminology and like references that are internal to the thing that they are trying to describe. And every now and again, I just have to sit there and go like, they have no concept of that thing. The person that you are explaining this thing to has no concept of the thing you are describing. And if you want them to be as excited about it as you are, then you need to be able to bring it to them. Because nobody could accept a black hole of knowledge. They need to have something to grab onto. So yeah, no, those two things helped out a lot for me. So you know what? The idea of kids having that be something they have to do as well, I think would be good. It helped me a lot, so maybe if they didn't teach American history from Plymouth Rock to World War I every year, we could learn more. Astro says, even if you can explain it, explaining it in a way that excites others is a separate skill. Right, and to explain something in a way that excites somebody else, you need to be able to you need to be able to ask qualifying questions. Like, hey, what's your favorite game? Right? Like, I want to sell you on Clair Obscur. So I'm going to say like, hey, what's your favorite game? What's your favorite franchise? What's your favorite type of video game? And if you say something that has like a super dramatic story with a lot of deep lore, like a Dark Souls style game, then I will try to get you excited for this game through that lens. If you like turn-based combat and that's the thing that really gets you, I'll try to talk about it through that end. If you like action-based combat and that's the lens that you tend to view video games through, then I'll talk about the real-time aspects of the Clair Obscur combat system. If you are a Path of Exile nerd who really likes big spreadsheets for how your characters are built, then I'll tell you about the systems that are in that game that facilitate that. I will pick the thing that is most likely to excite you from the thing I am trying to excite you for in order to talk about it. And if you find that there are other things in that game that you really like, that you appreciate over and above the basic stuff that I'm explaining, then sure, why not? That's a thing that we can figure out later on down the road. But for me to get you excited about it first, we've got to have some baseline. And I've even made a video before about how frustrating it is when somebody tackles that thing that I'm describing from the lens of, oh, you like X, therefore you should like Y. That's the part that kind of pisses me off. Because when somebody says, hey, you like X, therefore you should like Y, my response to that is going to largely be, sometimes I like the thing that we're talking about because it is the sum of its parts, not because of what any of those individual parts are. And other times they're just aspects of a combat system in a game that I like because they are aspects of that combat system. But it's usually a fool's errand to try to sell it to me through the lens of, you like survival horror, therefore you should like, I don't know, this horror-based crafting survival sim. Like, no.
Order on ballots so that people who vote impulsively won't skew the results. Actually, we should really be doing that anyway, just in general. Look, I genuinely believe...
Hold on, say that one more time for the impulsive votes. 1 sec.
Ballots so that people who vote impulsively won't skew. He's come in to give a little speech and distribute pamphlets in civics class during the election campaign. And make sure to randomize the candidate order on ballots so that people who vote impulsively won't skew the results. Actually, we should really be doing that anyway, just in general. Look,
actually,
I genuinely believe in democracy, not just as the least bad system of governance, but as an intrinsic human right. It's messy and it's stressful, and in every country on earth it needs serious reforms. But people have an absolute right to collectively control the government that controls them. Even if it would be more efficient to put a cabal of geniuses or a super intelligent AI in charge, efficiency...
Yeah, there is a person who is backsliding politically, who I've had conversations with recently, who is, like, they went to China. They are starting to think that, oh man, look at all the things they were able to accomplish. We would be able to accomplish so much more if we didn't have democracy. And I'm just sitting there like, no, you're just gambling on the person that is in power having your best interest at heart. And I promise you, they most likely don't. Like, no. I'm sorry. I am not going to accept any version of I do not get the right to figure out for myself what my life should look like. I do not trust the government to do that. I don't think I'm ever going to trust the government to do that. Jet says, but children aren't voting impulsively. They're voting the way they've been taught by their parents, by and large, until they're old enough to do so. At some critical, do at least some critical thinking. I mean, it can be argued that is in fact voting impulsively. Jet
is not the point. Universal suffrage. One person, one vote. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree. I'll hang around to debate with anyone who makes a particularly good counter-argument. If you want me to respond though, I'd recommend keeping it short and focusing on one main point. Also, anyone who wants to say that old people shouldn't be allowed to vote because it's not their future, don't bother. Your views are cringe, discriminatory, and vaguely fascist. Subscribe to help me hit 50k subs.
Yeah, nope, I can agree with that. If your position is that there is a group of people that should not be allowed to vote, that had the ability to vote at one point in time, then that's horrible. And I can kind of see the argument for that operating the other way around as well. Whether or not I agree with it, the point is actually very, very solid. Astro says also doesn't understand the single-party system. It is somewhat more democratic than it appears, in that the people at various levels are picked locally. The difference is at the top, it's not voted in. Right, and the thing is, I think that people at the top should be voted in as well. I think the people with the maximum amount of power should be forced to justify their positions as much as anybody else. But maybe that's the part of me that's a little anarchistic. Because the entire point of like anarchy at a baseline is that all hierarchies must justify themselves. And I may not consider myself an anarchist, but if there is one thing that I can agree with them on, it is that I believe that any hierarchy of any kind should be forced to justify itself. And if it can't, then it ought just disappear into the fucking nether. Robbie says, have you seen how students fill out multiple choice tests? Jet says he's not talking about like teenagers though. He's said at the beginning of the video, all children, even toddlers. Right, but they fill in. They also do children who are for also Christmas tree tests. I know because when I was at Pensacola Christian Academy at like 4, 5, and 6 years old in kindergarten, we got tests that we could Christmas tree. That's thing that happened. Like you can't argue actually kids don't vote impulsive or kids don't do things impulsively. Like that's not an argument. That is never an argument you will ever be able to sustain in any way, shape, or form. The point that was being made by Silly Conversations is that whether or not they vote impulsively is immaterial. It doesn't matter whether or not they vote impulsively because adults also vote impulsively. And one of the control mechanisms for that is to randomize the order of the candidates on any particular sheet. That is one of the ways that you can handle that. Sean says, I still get angry about the driver's test because they still do that load of pictures when they say is this a red light or a blue light? Why is that a thing to get angry for? Astro says, adults vote with insufficient, or wrong information all the time too. Right. Like, that's why I can kind of see where he's coming from, because while my argument, my perspective is largely that there is a group of people who should not be catered to in politics because I feel like it would be a largely predatory world when they are. I don't want the world where Republicans are making political ads to show on children's TV to push for the kids. I don't want that world. Should those kids be allowed to vote? I can agree with that. I actually can 100% agree with that position. But I think that if we were to do that, we would need to have stricter laws on how politicians are allowed to advertise themselves. Make it so that politicians have to advertise themselves in a way that is far more honest. Or just make it to where they're not allowed to advertise themselves the way they do, or make it to where they're not allowed to spend a fuck ton of money advertising themselves. Fix something in that particular databank, and I'm perfectly okay with kids being allowed to vote. My problem has less to do with the children and has more to do with the people who would prey on them. Jet says, I think it's a good idea on paper, but it doesn't account for inherited biases and parents telling them, okay, this is the one you vote for. Right, but that happens anyway with like wives. Like okay, so I know that in terms of numbers, these are different things, but there's not a huge difference between like the Mormon husband with the 4 to 6 daughter wives, whatever the fuck they're called, sister wives, telling them how they are supposed to vote, and a quiver fuller telling their kids how they are supposed to vote. Like that's a thing that's going to happen irrespective. And that also happens just within families too. Now, there is a thing that would concern me, and it is the idea that a group of quiverfullers would end up getting more votes as a result of that. Jet says, those are adults, and if they fuck up, that's their own fault. Like, hopefully most adult voters aren't voting for a person because their mom said so. You'd be surprised. So I guess that's the other thing. Like, I am scared of the world where the quiverful movement inadvertently has more... Jesus Christ, I can't survive here at all. Like, I am scared of the world where the quiverful movement gets more power. What is even hitting me? There's nothing there. There's literally nothing there. There's nothing touching me there. How do people play this game in hardcore? We're just gonna... Oh, they have fucking mortar. That's why. They have mortar. Normal Gamer Gal says, we do mail-in voting, and I have a friend who thought a family voting around a table was normal. She doesn't do it anymore. Yeah, that's something that I'm not surprised about. Okay, I just gotta get to the other side. Oh wait, no, I can't get to the other side. That's not a thing that I get to do. I don't think I can do this room. I have the numbers to do it, but I just don't have the deep... I'm gonna fucking kill myself. I am just gonna fucking shoot myself. I swear to God. I swear to God, everything about this room makes me just want to cry blood. What even am I supposed to do here? What is the strategy for survival here other than like hope, cry, bleed out the anus? Like it's not... I can't. Did any of you who play Diablo 3 as well, I'm on T16. Maybe if you're in the comment section watching when this goes live, assuming that this part is kept in by KFox, can you tell me if you see a way to handle that? So nuke it from orbit? Just says, what it comes down to for me is that if they aren't expected to consent to a legal contract or a relationship because they're too young to understand the implications, that should be applied to voting as well. So I actually disagree with that. I disagree with that perspective, and let me explain why. I think there's a fundamental difference between those two things. A child's ability to consent, to understand something enough to consent, is why we largely have rules about them not being able to have to adhere to a contract, and it's why we have rules about them not being able to engage sexually with people who are of a certain age above them, like when somebody is 15 and somebody else is 18. Outside of places that have Romeo or Juliet laws, we have laws against that and about that. So that is largely because they lack the ability for informed consent, because they do not need that contract in order to function as a human being in a democratic society. They don't. It's not necessary for them. Whereas, on the other hand, every law that is ever written does affect them. Every law that is ever written is something that they have to account for in their day-to-day, even if they don't know it yet, and the earlier that they have to think about it, there's an argument that it's better. I think trying to argue that they cannot consent to things, therefore they shouldn't be allowed to vote, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. when most of the things that you would have to argue a kid can or cannot consent to are things that are optional. Contracts are optional. Obligations like that are optional. Intimacy is optional. These are things that we recognize a child should have a measure of ability to abstain from, if not full ability to abstain from. Whereas like civil duty is a little different. You are in a democratic society. Every single law affects you from the moment you're born to now. So yeah, that I don't think the contract argument works for that. I think the contract argument is not a good argument. Child does not need that contract to get up and do something, but that child's ability to have access to a school lunch may be entirely dependent on who is in office. Like, it feels like a weird hill to, like, fight on. It feels maybe like there's some personal problem that has existed in the past, and as a result of that, you are having the opinion that you have at that point, Jet. I don't know. I am unsure. Said every time I hear contract, I think of QB. Yeah. Do you want to make a contract with me? But anyway, that was Silly Conversations voter video. I think it was interesting. The points there have actually shifted my opinion a little bit. And I still hold that kids should not be able to vote, but that is because the world around them is engineered in such a way that would become incredibly predatory towards them if they did. If we can find a way to control for that or minimize it, then I think that it's perfectly reasonable for kids to be able to do that. But that's just me. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hey, you made it to the end. I want to give an extra thanks to the patrons who allow me to do this full time. I want to thank Aaron Rail, Astral, Britzkrieg, Jemshin, Poundini, Red Joker, Victoria, Jonas, Craig, Tarika, Fireshard, Smiling GM, John, Dren Hadamada, Creeper, Sagitta, you know I'm not saying that last part, Sylvie Snow, Valis of Seraph, Ottoman Angel, Rooster Rachel, and Fire Panda, who are all my $20 and up patrons.